Social engineering on an unprecedented scale, that's what we're looking at with India's proposed 80% reservation policy. But the consequences could reshape an entire nation's future in ways nobody expects.
That's quite a bold statement. What makes this particular proposal so transformative?
Well, imagine completely rewiring how every single business, hospital, and tech company in India hires people. We're talking about forcing 80% of all positions, not just government jobs, but private sector too, to be filled based on caste categories rather than qualifications.
And how would that affect India's position as a global tech hub?
You know what's fascinating? Industry experts are predicting a massive exodus. Companies like TCS, Infosys, which currently employ hundreds of thousands, might actually relocate to places like Vietnam or Dubai where they can hire freely.
That would be huge for the economy. What about the startup ecosystem?
Well, here's the thing. India's startup scene, which raised over $42 billion in 2021, could essentially collapse. Picture trying to build the next unicorn when you can't even choose who to hire for your core team.
So we're looking at potential economic impacts that go way beyond just employment numbers.
Exactly, and get this, economists are suggesting it could trigger the largest brain drain since the 1970s. Like, we're talking about skilled professionals, entire families relocating because, well, when your primary qualification becomes your caste certificate rather than your abilities, what's the incentive to excel?
Though some would argue it's about correcting historical inequalities.
Sure, but here's the real kicker. Studies show that sustainable social mobility comes from education and skill development. You know what's interesting? Countries that have successfully reduced social inequality, like South Korea and Japan, focused on universal access to quality education rather than extensive quotas.
What about the immediate business impact?
Well, foreign investors would likely pull back significantly. I mean, imagine telling a multinational company that 80% of their Indian workforce must be hired based on caste rather than merit. The World Bank estimates it could reduce foreign direct investment by up to 60%.
That's quite a staggering number.
And here's something people aren't talking about: the impact on innovation. Research shows diverse teams perform better, but that diversity needs to include cognitive and skill-based variety, not just demographic categories.
How might this affect international competitiveness?
So, check this out. India currently ranks 48th in the Global Innovation Index. Experts predict this policy could drop that ranking by 30 positions within 5 years. Like, you're essentially handicapping every company's ability to compete globally.
What alternatives might work better?
Well, data from successful social mobility programs worldwide shows a three-pronged approach works best: early education investment, targeted skill development, and entrepreneurship support. Countries that implemented these saw 40% higher social mobility rates than those relying on quotas.
Those numbers really put things in perspective.
And you know what's really interesting? Studies of similar policies in other countries show they often end up hurting the very communities they're meant to help. Like, in Malaysia's Bumiputra policy, their version of affirmative action actually increased income inequality within the protected groups.
That's fascinating and somewhat counterintuitive.
Right? And here's the final piece that really brings it home. Research shows that sustainable social progress comes from creating new opportunities, not just redistributing existing ones. When you focus on building capabilities rather than just moving people around, you get much better long-term results.
Sounds like we're talking about fundamental system change rather than quick fixes.
Exactly, and that's really the heart of this whole debate. It's not about whether we need change everyone agrees we do. It's about finding solutions that unite rather than divide, that build up rather than tear down. The data clearly shows which approach works better in the long run.